But he doesn't know it because he doesn't know about the laws of learning. So there is only, you know, we are to love our children. We are to give them to what is called unconditional love. We are to love our children when they are good, when they are bad, when they are, you know, clean and smell nice, when they're dirty and smell bad. We love them all the time. We give them unconditional love. But we don't have to express that unconditional love to them all the time. And it is suggested in Islam that in a different context, that if you want to argue for the right with somebody, that you do so with beautiful words and wisdom. And the wisdom, the beautiful words part means words or gestures or smiles or things that people like to get, right? Communication that people find pleasant. But the wisdom part is when you give it. So although you have unconditional love for your child all the time, when you express that love is very important. You should express that love after they have done things that are positive, so that those positive things will increase in rate and magnitude. You only can express a certain amount of love to your children, although you love them unconditionally all the time. So pick those times to express that love to them that are after things that they have done good. So that those things that they have done that are good things, and good characteristics that they have, will tend to increase in rate and magnitude. And be really careful that you don't get caught up like this grandfather did, who had no idea about the laws of learning, and is teaching his child very directly and very quickly a very negative and very wrong Islamic behavior, which if he had known what he was doing, of course, he would not have done that thing. But it was his ignorance of not knowing about the laws of learning that allowed him to do this. And this is why we have so many problems in the world, is because so many people have no idea about the laws of learning. You know, we have people who put on these terrible movies with lots of violence, and then somebody will say to them, "Don't you think these really violent movies make people do violent behavior?" And they'll say, "No, no. You know, we've done studies. These movies, they don't make, they don't change normal people's behavior from non-violent to violent." Well, this is probably true, but not everybody is normal, and there are people who are just on the edge of violence anyway. So they see a movie about some particular type of violence, and then they say, "I'd like to try that," because of this normal curve, right? But everyone on the whole curve, just as I said yesterday, or about everyone who learns about the scientific proof of the existence of God, will move somewhat towards a belief in God, even if it is just very early steps of thinking, well, I thought there was no evidence, now there's at least people claiming there is evidence. The same thing is true with seeing violence on TV. And even worse, or at least as bad, is the fact that we come to accept violence as a normal part of life. If we only saw the amount of violence that actually happens in real life, that is not very much violence. Like in a place like Malaysia, it is very rare to see some actual physical violence go on. So you don't see lots and lots of instances of people stabbing and shooting each other. But in America, where kids watch a lot of TV, by the time they finish high school, they have watched an average of over 20,000 murders on television. Now, if you watch 20,000 murders, even if they are dramatic presentations on television, it desensitizes you to violence. And it makes you feel like, well, murders are just one of the natural things that happen. And a lot of the way the murders are done, or the killings are done, like you have people like Clint Eastwood when he used to do these Dirty Harry type movies. You know, it isn't like oh, I shoot the person and, oh, wow, blood everywhere, this is really terrible. He just casually, boom, you know, and then goes on with his life like it is nothing. So you see something like this 20,000 times over 18 years, and you get the idea that this is a common thing in society, where it isn't a common thing in society at all. But by believing it is a common thing in society, it is moving everybody to be desensitized to it happening and considering it normal behavior in society. So when we see in the paper now, almost every day there's a murder or more, we don't feel really shocked, because we see on television, if we watch Western, you know, astro movies or something like that, we see hundreds of movies perhaps hundreds of murders every day, so it is not such a big deal. But every one of these things, remember, absolutely every influence that comes in and is perceived writes a message in your total past learning history. So if you have 20,000 messages written in there that murder occurs commonly and can be done without much emotional feeling, then it is going to teach you that that is the way life really is. There was an instance in Britain where there was an Australian TV series, I forget the name of it, but I mean, and believe me, an Australian TV series will have a lot of really wrong behavior in it. You know, there'll be lots of drinking, and there'll be drugs, and there'll be lots of promiscuous sex, and there'll be violence and all of this. So in some schools in Britain, they were actually, as part of the class, they were showing this TV series because they said this would be the best example these kids would ever be seeing of normal life. And they wanted to teach them what normal life would be like rather than the lives they were living. So they must have lived in a really terrible area. This series was better than where they lived. But it is extremely naive or even more ingenuous, meaning ingenuous is like when you say something is true and you know it is not true. Like you have these owners of the tobacco companies, and they come in and they get investigated by congressional committees, and they say, and like a senator will say to them, do you seriously believe that the data that says cigarette smoking is harmful to health, that this is false and smoking cigarettes does not harm health? And they'll say, yes, as far as I'm concerned, that data is no good. We have data that shows that cigarette smoking does not harm health. Now, personally, I think they are just lying. But this kind of thing goes on, and maybe because they are making so many billions of dollars from it, it alters their perception. Because, as I think did I mention the other day when I was talking about perception, that perception is not an objective thing. You know, you can see Bill Gates as a communist, or from the point of view of communist or capitalist, and you see him differently. If you are making billions of dollars from something, like entertainment industry people or tobacco industry people or alcohol industry people, you have a very big stake in thinking what you are doing is okay. Or even if you don't really think it's okay enough to do because of the money you get. I remember reading in the Star newspaper here in Australia, they interviewed a middle-aged Chinese lady who was bringing in young from late teen to early 20 naive Chinese girls to work in prostitution in Malaysia. And she is caught by the police. And when she is interviewed by the Star reporter, she said, I don't know why they're making such a big deal out of this. What I'm doing was good. I'm making a lot of money. So she had no idea, right? From her point of view, the making of money superseded the huge immorality of bringing these girls into prostitution. So all of these people, whatever they think, right? They came to think those things through this learning process. So just very briefly again, I think I said this the first time, but what we really want to do, because we want to get children to want to do the right thing rather than I need to have this sort of permanently drawn. I'll leave a bit out. I'll leave perception out for now. What we want children to do is to understand that every single thing that comes in, every influence that comes in, will have some effect greater than 0. Which is greater? Is this greater than?
Yeah.
Okay, everything that comes in is going to have some effect greater than 0. And what its effect will be based on these laws of learning. Is it rewarding or is it punishing? So, getting back to the example before of the clothing of Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, the girls see this, and if they see this as a positive thing, then it is rewarding to them. And they are going to increase in rate and magnitude in the future in dressing in that way. If they see it as a negative thing, then the opposite will be the effect. So, because so often it is presented in a negative way, we ask them to use this inner speech that Allah has blessed them with to make a judgment each time an influence comes in, or even an influence from here, right? You have a thought, you have a negative thought. In Islam, we are encouraged to keep a constant awareness of our thoughts. And if we have a negative thought, we are supposed to immediately intervene and take away the power of that negative thought. In other words, if I were to think, oh, I'm quite thirsty, after the talk, I'll go out and have a beer, right? I should say to myself, oh, no, this is not a good thing to do, right? Allah has prescribed alcohol as something that is wrong for us, so I wouldn't want to do that. You see, so we're supposed to be constantly monitoring our own thoughts, but we are also supposed to be monitoring the social influences and our own thoughts. And just to say again, because this is a very important point, and we need the children to understand this, that every single influence that comes in, there are no such thing as neutral influences. There are influences that are going to take them one way or the other, and there's only two ways to go, toward Allah or toward Shaitan. And they need to, this is part of taqwa. Is that how we spell it? Or W-A? Taqwa, sometimes children, I ask them, what does taqwa mean? And they say, fear of Allah. But that is a very simplistic understanding. It means really awe of Allah, to have so much, to value Allah so much, and love Him so much, that you want only to do what He wants you to do. But to do only what He wants you to do, you must know what He wants you to do. So part of taqwa is what is called enlightenment, an understanding all that is right, that Allah says is right, and all that Allah says is wrong. And so children need to be taught to develop a very high taqwa, so when they make judgments on the social influences that come in or the thoughts from their inner speech, they can make a good judgment on each one. Is this something that Allah wants me to do, takes me to Him? Or is this something Allah does not want me to do and takes me from Him to Shaitan? And then, as I said before, then to counter that influence with their inner speech. So in a way, it doesn't matter so much whether the influences coming in are bad or not, if they are constantly countering them with their inner speech, with high taqwa and love of Allah, to say, every bad influence that comes in, I reject. Yes, I am in a world where there are a lot of bad influences coming in, but I notice them, I know the effect they are going to have on me. If I think they are good, I am going to go ahead and go in that direction. So it is important for me to recognize them as bad, so that I go in a positive direction. And this is a big part of how we get children to behave rightly in the world. And it is a big part of what I was saying earlier, is how you get children, or how you get learning that takes place in one place with somebody teaching them this, like a parent teaching them this, and then they go somewhere else, like they go somewhere with their friends, and you are not there with your influence, but they carry that influence with them as the message that is written in their consciousness. And then if they are sufficiently motivated to do so, they will use their inner speech. And this is the power Allah gives them as His Khalifa. That wherever they go, they have the power to resist negative influence. So it's a matter of teaching them to recognize negative influence, how to counter negative influence, and very importantly, as I said, with all learning that takes place, you have to have them motivated to not want to participate in negative influence. And you want them to have great love for everything that Allah wants, and great disdain or dislike for everything that Shaitan wants. Yes?
If I have a situation where let's say my kid has performed a salat, right? And I say, or the fasting in Ramadan, and I say, I'm not going to reward you, because the reward from Allah comes later. And the reward is not immediate, because you said earlier that for maximum effect, the stimulus that comes must be as quickly as possible. But whenever my kid does something, I teach him that the reward from Allah comes in the hereafter, so you must do it for Allah. Can that be said as an inner speech first, and can that inner speech supersede the law of learning? That means traditionally, when people teach their children, they do this. They try to invade the taqwa. I think foregoing all these laws of conditioning, to make the child passive towards Allah's orders, and later, can that supersede that?
Okay, in the first place, I don't think it is true in Islam that Allah has said the reward for right behavior is only in paradise. He tells us the reward is in this world and in paradise. So it is fair to give reward, right? But you can give reward in the way of saying, I'm so happy to see you fast, because Allah will reward you in this world and in paradise. You see? So the reward is actually given in the form of giving them advice that will write a message in there to make it even stronger, that knowledge that is the relationship between the right behavior. And then on the giving of praise, we want to be careful in Islam, because all praise ultimately is due to is owing to Allah. So we teach the children that sometimes when they do good things, people like these good things, and they give the praise to them. But this praise is actually to be passed on to Allah. So they say something with their inner speech, you know, indicating that their thankfulness to Allah for the fact that they did the thing that received the praise, and recognize that Allah is the one who is deserving of the praise by putting them, helping them to be someone who did the thing that got the praise that really gets passed on and deserved by Allah.
The law of learning is actually going on without being aware. It is going on that way.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, most of it is unaware, and this is why most of the world has done what is called blow with the wind, because you just go whichever way the influences are, because we don't look at the world as a world of influences. But Allah has told us we are to look at the world as a world of influences, and we are supposed to support those influences that support His will, and oppose those influences that go against His will. So these laws of learning, which are, by the way, just as the laws of physics are applied to the universe by Allah, and the laws of chemistry and the laws of biology to the degree we have correctly understood the laws of learning, these laws are applied by Allah to allow biological life forms and human beings to take direction, to move in the right direction, to move toward carrying out His will, just as the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology are to do. So as the groupings of subatomic particles become more and more complex, Allah starts giving different levels of laws to make sure that His will is carried out. And this is why, as Khalifah of Allah, He has given us the ability to, He has given us the responsibility and obligation to choose to do that which is right, and He has also given us the tool through our inner speech and through revelation on how to use it, how to counter the negative influences and increase the influence, the power of the positive influences that take us toward Him. So He has given us everything we need. These laws of learning, though, they are amoral, meaning that the laws of learning themselves will take you toward good or they will take you toward bad, depending on what you do with your free will as these influences come in. That's what it means to be a Khalifah of Allah. So to be a successful Khalifah of Allah, you really need to understand well these laws of learning and how the influences affect you and which direction they are taking you, so that you can do what you are supposed to do as Khalifah of Allah, which is always make yourself good, which we essentially do by commanding the right, forbidding the wrong for ourselves. With our friends, we help those around us, eventually all of human society. We try and improve our friends and all of human society eventually by keeping the same look on what the influences will be on them. If you see your friend having a bad influence on them, you say to them, that is a bad influence on you. That will take you to shaitan. You don't want that. You know, so you should say these things. If your friend doesn't know these laws of learning, you see, then you teach it to your friends. This is part of your second responsibility as Khalifah of Allah, to help others become good. So these laws of learning are very, very critical to be used by the symbolic language or the inner speech that Allah has given us when He breathed it into Adam and gave us our free will. You cannot exercise your free will unless you are able to discriminate between which is right and wrong, and unless you are motivated to use the laws of learning to increase the power of the positive and decrease the power of the negative. So it is part of Allah's perfect system, or what I referred to yesterday as His grand cosmic plan, that we learn these things. This is why I said, I think in the beginning of the course, that this all comes from a hypothesis that if you give any individual or social group a positive, accurate, motivational worldview, which I now know to be Islam scientifically and logically understood, along with the traditional understanding, plus a good understanding of the laws of learning by which all human characteristics develop. You give any individual or social group those two things, they will naturally and inevitably move toward everything good and right, because that is the system of life that Allah has set up for us. That is the right way of life He has given us. You know, Islam is not, as a matter of fact, I feel very uncomfortable calling Islam one of the world's religions, because religion implies it is just your spiritual duties. You know, you pray, you fast, you zakat, you know, you do these various things. Islam is total way of life. You know, deen does not translate as religion, it translates as way of life. And other religions do not see their religion in that way, and they didn't practice them very much in that way, and we are starting not to practice so much in that way. But we really need to understand this, and further to the thing that I said about the wrongness of the use of punishment or the use of force to get the right thing to happen. I think some statements in Islam are much broader then they are often interpreted such as there is to be no compulsion in our deen, which I think I mentioned the other day. Many people interpret as you are not to compel people to become Muslim. But if you take the wording itself, there should be no compulsion in our deen. It's saying there should be no compulsion in our right Islamic way of life. Meaning that we should do everything that is right in Islam, everything that Allah has told us is within our right to do and is legal and lawful to us, or halal, that those are the things that we should choose by our free will. We should not be forced to do them. And this is the goal of what a right Islamic world is about. And this is what it means to be Khalifah of Allah. And so when you teach children that, and it really gets into their heart and their mind so that they understand it intellectually and logically in their mind, and they feel it very warmly and powerfully in their heart, then they take this with them. And they are very hard to touch with negativeness. But if you have not put these things into their hearts and their minds, then they go out without an armor into a world that is going to attack them with all sorts of negative ideas from secular materialism. And these attacks are very, very powerful and very, very successful. You send your children out there without the armor of having, good taqwa and good motivation to be Khalifah of Allah, and good understanding of the laws of learning, and good understanding of discriminating between right and wrong. You send your children out into the world of today without those three things. Please don't expect them to grow up to be really good. We have to prepare our children. Allah wants us. This is part of growing up in the good Islamic family. Part of the two things you have to give the children. They need to be taught all of those things. They are not just to be taught to pray and to fast and this. We often hear this hadith, which is correct from our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The story about the Bedouin who came in and he said, how much do I have to pray? And the Prophet said 5 times a day. And he said, okay, I'll do that, no more. How much do I have to fast 1 month a year and no more? He said, okay, I'll do that. How much zakat do I have to pay? A certain amount. He said, I'll pay that, no more. And the Prophet said to him, if you do all that, you're guaranteed paradise. That's the way we normally hear it. Okay? But that is not all of it that there was. That is taken a little bit out of context because there were some other words. The Prophet said, if you do all that and make the halal halal and the haram haram, you are guaranteed paradise. Which he has essentially said, if you do those obligatory spiritual things and everything else that is right and nothing else that is wrong, you are guaranteed paradise. This is what we need to teach children. And they need to know that things work on a shaping process, and you do not just jump all of a sudden from being good to being bad. That it is small steps, and so you have to look out for these early small steps. If you are hanging out after school with your friends and they offer you a cigarette and you say no, it is not a matter of thinking, wow, I am such a good Muslim because I said no. Because what if maybe in your inner speech you said, it would be pretty cool if I could do that, but I'm not going to. See, so they took just that little tiny step towards thinking it is okay or might be a good thing to do, although they actually didn't do the wrong thing. So they need to learn the subtleties of the learning process so that they can jump in very early in the shaping process. I was talking with some of the older kids in Adni school last year about the right relationship between boys and girls. And we discussed what does Allah say is the right relationship between boys and girls who have reached puberty. And the right relationship is you just basically stay apart from each other and can only communicate if it is like a business or an official matter where you have to communicate. And the fact of even having, like in class, just a few friendly words between a boy and a girl is an early step on the shaping process. And if you have a few friendly words in the classroom, maybe then you'll walk down the hall together and have a few friendly words, and then maybe you'll sit outside on the bench together and have a few friendly words. And then who knows where it leads. So you have to break in early in the shaping process before the shaping process gets underway. And Allah told us, you stop the shaping process at the point where it is anything more than a necessary communication, and you don't have friendly social communication. So that you never get started in the shaping process. And if you don't get started in the shaping process, you never get from where you are at the baseline to the goal. And if the goal is illicit sexual activity, right? And you never say a first friendly word, you're never going to get to the illicit sexual activity. You say the first friendly word, you're taking the first steps toward that could go there, not necessarily will. So Allah says, stop at that point. Interestingly, the response from some of the kids was that that's just too hard to do. I mean, you know, because we have honest discussions, they said, you just can't do that today. And I said, I realize that is the situation you are caught in. You are caught in a world that says today that is okay, and it says not only is it okay, but it is not okay if you don't. It is like there is something wrong with you if you do what Allah said to do, and that you have to be powerful enough, because Muslims are not supposed to be weak. As I say to them, you know, is a Muslim supposed to be strong or weak? They say strong. I say, well, if you are supposed to be strong, are you supposed to let shaitan influence you? And they say no. So I said, should you do anything that shaitan wants? And they say no. And I say, well, does shaitan want you to take the first steps towards an illicit sexual relationship? And they say yes. And I say, well, if the first step is just some friendly words in the classroom, then should you take that step or not? Should you be strong enough not to take that step? Even though the boys may think, oh, well, she's really stuck up, or, you know, or you see your friends doing it, and you think that I should do it too. So we need to build that inner strength in. Now it's not going, and I say to him, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen quickly. And Allah recognizes the situation we are in at the moment. And Allah is very merciful with us. And Allah does not ask us for something that we cannot do. But Allah does ask us to sincerely try and do everything that we can do. So you need to be sure when you say you can't do this, is it really that you can't do it, or is it just hard to do, something you could do, but it's easier not to do? And then if that is the case, you are following the will of shaitan, not the will of Allah. And have these kind of talks with kids, and they are very powerful. Interestingly, the same class, a couple of weeks later observed that they went on a excursion to participate in the when I think Yusuf Islam was here to be ushers in that, and they were down there all day long together with very little adult supervision. And I dropped in to see how things were going, and they didn't have much to do, so they had a lot of free time. And in the auditorium, all the boys were sitting on one side and all the girls were sitting on the other side. And nobody had made them do that. You know, they had decided to do that. Because I said to one of the girls, I said, I notice everyone is really separated and the boys are not talking with the girls. They said, yes, we decided that best to keep separate. So sometimes these talks can have a lot of impact, right? Because these messages that get written in their consciousness, if they think about them rightly, with their self-reflective consciousness or their inner speech, they can increase the power of them. And apparently this particular class was very affected by those words. And some of these girls I know previously, I mean, it's because it's not only the boys seeking out the girls, but in modern times, some of the young girls are quite active in seeking out the boys. And some of these girls who had been very active in going around and talking with boys actually had stopped going around and talking to boys as much as they had. So this kind of thing is really good to see, and it is very rewarding. You remember I mentioned earlier about how punishment is so effective because you see the effect of it so quickly. But if you're using reward, you often don't see the effect so very quickly. So you have to watch carefully to see the reward. You know, this reward for me for having this conversation with this class happened a few weeks later. And if I hadn't remembered what had gone on and connected the two, I might not have felt so rewarded as I did for having that conversation with them. Because reward is a much more subtle thing in its effect than the very direct and overt consequences of punishment. And if the two are just confronted right with each other, punishment or positiveness, I don't remember if I said this in the earlier lecture, but if you have a room and there's one person in the room and two people come up to them, there's a chair on this side of the room and a chair on that side of the room. Did I give this example before? Okay, so one person comes up, two people come up to the one person in the room, and one of them says, I would really appreciate it if you would sit in that chair over there. It would be very helpful for me, and I would like it a lot. And the other person, who's got a big stick, says, if you don't sit in this chair over on this side of the room, I'm going to hit you as hard as I can with this stick. Well, in a direct confrontation like that, negativeness, force, and aggression is probably going to win over reward. So this is why reward, the reward for the use of force and aggression, because it is quite direct, has a very powerful effect on us, because we notice it very clearly. And when we didn't understand all the consequences, as B.F. Skinner said, we are only beginning to understand the power of love as we are beginning to understand the weakness of force and aggression. Before, we didn't understand the weakness of force and aggression. We thought force and aggression worked really well. Now we know it doesn't work really well. And we know that reward or love, positive relationship, works really well. So, but it doesn't work as fast, and for you to be rewarded for using it, you have to be careful to look for its positive effects later on, because you're not going to see them in the half second usually. It would be the ideal after the response in the learning experience. So that is pretty much today's preliminary talk on learning. We will go much deeper into it in later discussions. So I thank you very much for letting me talk with you today, and our time is up, unless there were any more questions or anything that somebody wanted to add. I think it should all happen at the same time. You know, all of these things I tell you would be useful for you to tell your children. This is not just adult knowledge I'm talking about. This is knowledge that should be available to every human being. And so I would start telling children about their roles and responsibility as Khalifah of Allah from before the time that they are verbal. I mean, I would start literally at birth telling them about it, knowing they can't understand, but they just get familiar with the ideas. And of course, you should try and model that in your life. I mean, the better model the parent and the teacher is of these Khalifah roles, the more effective it will be with the kids. But you can't depend on waiting till the adults change to change the kids, because also the children have not had so much past information written on their total past learning history that they have to overcome to get really comfortable and excited about the role of Khalifah of Allah, and get really dedicated to it, and get that burning love in their heart, right? That they are more open to new information than adults are sometimes. So sometimes what we find happening is the kids learn it at school, parents haven't taken the opportunity to learn much of it at home, but the children take it into the home and teach it to the parents. So it can be a both-way process. So I think it is very important that the ideal is everybody learn it at the same time. But we certainly don't want to exclude the kids, because the kids may be more receptive in the beginning than the adults. Yes, sister?
This procedure where you said about punishment, now you reason with them and then you withdraw out and then the punishment comes. So this thing about trying, how would you like sort of like put it forward in terms of making the person understand why Allah has given the stipulation in terms of hitting? It's a symbolic hitting, I know that, but how would you kind of like put it in a way that they say, why is it that man has been given that as a, you know what I mean? So can you kind of comment on it?
Well, it is because Allah has apparently cast men in a certain role, in that in all things there needs to be a leader. You can't have like a home without a leader, and you can't have a competition in a home between the man on the woman and the woman as to who is to be the leader. So for whatever reasons Allah He has designated the man as ultimately the leader. But this does not mean his leadership is to just to be like a dictator, right? He is to be like a caliph who takes advice from everyone in the ummah, or a man should take advice from everyone in the family, and his decision should be in the best interests of everyone in the family, not in his own best interests. If he is making a selfish decision on the basis of his own interests, he is then committing a sin. And as to the punishment itself, first a gentle reminder, then a removal of physical affection, and then what has sometimes been called beating. The beating has been over and over described and interpreted by scholars as to be symbolic, not to be hurtful. And they have said things like no more than the light hitting with a siwak, you know, like the little toothbrush stick, or even like a feather or like a handkerchief. It is to be a symbolic thing. A man is not supposed to hurt his wife. So actually a man is not even supposed to use as much physical punishment on his wife as we are allowed to use on a child. You know, it isn't that it's okay to hit her 3 times as long as it doesn't draw blood or leave a bruise. It doesn't hit her in the face or the stomach. A man is not even really supposed to do that much. It is supposed to be a symbolic way of saying your behavior is so bad that it is harmful to a right Islamic relationship, for us having a right Islamic relationship. And I think, although a woman may not have the same right to punish the man in the same way, that the woman certainly does have the right, and I think obligation, to talk to the man in a way to instruct him also. It is not only the man that instructs the woman, but men and women in Islam are considered to be equal in knowledge and intelligence. And so that if a man is doing the wrong thing, the wife should be telling him, but she should tell him in a nice way. And he should, as the leader, take that information in a right way and use it the way Allah would want it used. That would be the ideal.
Why I ask you this question is that, for example, I'm faced with a woman who's not a Muslim, and this seems to be like an issue in terms of why is the man doing that? Why does he have to resort to the physical punishment? So it's something that kind of keeps him away from even wanting to accept, like, especially this, marriage situation.
Yeah.
So how?
Well, just make it really clear that that the opinion is that the man is not supposed to beat his wife in the way we consider beating a wife. That Allah is merciful and Islam is a merciful way of life. And although that term is used, beating, it is not to be meant as a beating in the sense that he can just slap her around and punch her or whatever. That there is a limit, and that limit has been decided by scholars to be so mild that it can only be considered a symbolic beating, to indicate how very serious that wrong behavior is. And a man is not supposed to resort to that use of, if you want to call that punishment, for mild discretions, only for very serious behaviors, like, say for instance, a wife just wants to have the right to go anywhere she wants, anytime she wants. Right? Well, if this is the case, then the husband may be very unhappy, and the wife may be going wrong places at wrong times. And so this shouldn't be happening. Also shouldn't be happening with a man. So Islam can sometimes sound bad, but in the interpretation of the scholars into what is really meant, we find that Islam is always tolerant and merciful. I mean, even in the use of hudud punishment, we look at the time of our Prophet and we say, how many people were executed for zina? Right? 2 that we know of, possibly 3 in the 10 years in Medina. And the 2 we know of for sure were given every opportunity in the world not to be executed for zina, but wanted to be executed because they wanted their punishment in this world and not in the afterlife, and felt strongly enough in their beliefs about Islam and what they had done wrong to make that choice themselves, even after having been advised by Abu Bakr and Omar and the Prophet himself. Actually, the Prophet himself. You know the story about the man who committed adultery, and first he went to Abu Bakr and admitted it, and the first thing Abu Bakr does is say, "Did you tell anyone else?" And he said, "Well, don't tell anyone else. Make your amends with Allah, repent with Allah, make it up to your wife, and never do it again." But the man wasn't satisfied. He thinks, well, Abu Bakr is too gentle. I'll go to Umar, who is really tough. First thing Umar says to him when he hears it, "Did you tell anyone else?" He says, "I just told Abu Bakr." He says, "Well, repent, do the same thing." Then when he went to the Prophet, first thing the Prophet asked him, "Did you tell anyone else?" Now that he finds out that he's already told people in the community, he says, "Well, because you have now made it a public, we have to go ahead and do it, because we cannot make it seem that we do not carry out the will of Allah. You have had every opportunity not to have this carried out. It is now your choice, and the example is needed in the community since you have made it public." So, for people who think that religion, that Islam is a religion of harshness and punishment, I mean, they are very wrong. Islam is about as tolerant as you can possibly be, and as merciful as you can possibly be. Islam is. That does not mean Muslims are. Unfortunately, around the world, many Muslims are very harsh. But that is not the sunnah of our Prophet, it's not the sunnah of the companions. So, to the degree that harshness has crept into the Ummah, it has crept in not through Islam, but through wrong cultural influences. And I think when we talk to people, we need to be honest and explain this kind of thing. So, if there are no more questions or discussions, we are running a little bit late today, so I thank you very much, my dear brothers and sisters, for allowing me to talk with you today. And next week's talk will be a deeper talk. Next Saturday's talk will be a much deeper level talk on the nature of existence of our physical creation. In other words, we will go a little bit beyond what we see to to what is the reality of the physical existence.